Hey guys, Will here. So there's been a pretty exciting update in iRacing this week with the release of 360 Hertz force feedback for Simucube 2 wheelbases specifically. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is unpacking this in a little bit of detail, telling you all the things you need to know about this, clearing up some misconceptions that I've seen floating around on the net as well, and taking it for a spin, basically letting you know what this is like to drive with, what kind of changes it makes to the overall driving experience with the Simucube 2 wheelbase. You might remember almost a year ago now when we reviewed the Acertec Invicta wheelbase, I said that I felt like it maybe felt a little bit more detailed than even my Simucube 2 Ultimate wheelbase does. So has this tipped the scales back in the other direction? That's what we're going to be finding out in today's video. So stick around, this is going to be a good one. So before we jump out onto the track, I just want to quickly spend some time clearing up a couple of misconceptions with regards to how this works, because it is quite a unique approach that they've taken here. As a lot of you guys will know, iRacing typically outputs their force feedback at a sample rate of 60 Hertz, which means that the signal that you're receiving through your hands, through your direct drive wheelbase, is being updated 60 times per second. That's a very basic way of explaining, but that's essentially what's happening. It's updating and refreshing what you're feeling 60 times per second. So with this new update, that is stepped up with the Simucube 2 wheelbase to 360 Hertz. But they've had to do some pretty clever things to actually make that work. And the first thing that you need to understand is that the actual sample rate inside iRacing hasn't changed. So that is still sitting at 60 Hertz. What they're doing is they're sending multiple packets of data within each cycle. So now instead of there being one update to the force feedback per cycle, there's actually 6 now. So it's not quite the same as updating 360 times per second instead of 60. There's a little bit of a roundabout way that they've done it. And the reason why that's important is because it does add a little bit of latency to the force feedback, apparently. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether we can feel this or not. But about 16 milliseconds of latency is what we're expecting here. And that's simply because that's the time it takes for the system to process the packet of information and then essentially play back those 6 different movements before the next cycle starts. So as far as the wheelbase and what you're feeling through your hands is concerned, it is essentially upping that sample rate, but in terms of how it's actually processed in the background, it isn't exactly the same as 360 Hertz as you would find on Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now, I did throw a few questions at Mika from Simucube, who's the guy who actually is responsible for the development of the Simucube 2. So the question that I threw at him was, do you have any information on how exactly this works? Seeing some conflicting reports online. Is it correct that iRacing packages 6 times the data into each packet and then still sends it at 60 Hertz, and in doing so adding a delay as we discussed? Or is iRacing actually broadcasting through your API at 360 Hertz? So the answer that he gave, just so you guys have this verbatim, is iRacing does controller processing, FFB or force feedback calculations, some network updates, and the telemetry memory map update at 60 Hertz. So that is basically what the physics is running at behind the scenes, which is responsible for generating the force feedback at least. Force feedback calculation now includes current torque and previous 5 values. Normally via Microsoft Direct Input, the latest value is sent to the wheelbase. So that's how force feedback typically works with the old Direct Input protocol, which has been in use now for, I want to say, the better part of 30 years, in fact. So that's how ancient the basic effects that we find used for most force feedback, with the exception, of course, of True Force from Logitech and the new Full Force from Fanatec, although that isn't actually implemented in any games yet, so we can't really talk about that too much. But he says, normally via Microsoft Direct Input, the latest value is sent to the wheelbase. The 360 Hertz mode sends all 6 samples in one API call that includes timing data, which is then converted in our software to a single USB call. So pretty clever stuff there. The wheelbase can then use that data. So example, play it in order. So there is 16.7 milliseconds of delay. So there you go, straight from the horse's mouth. And then he goes on to say that notable is that when IRFFB is used, which is that aftermarket program that you guys might be familiar with, which adds a couple of extra effects to the force feedback and enhances some of those seat of the pants feelings and whatnot. So notable is that when IRFFB is used, the delay was larger. And that was my experience. That's actually why I don't use IRFFB, because I find that it just feels a little bit too laggy for me. Some people will disagree with me on that, but that was my personal experience. He says, iRacing publishes the data into the telemetry memory map late in the 60 Hertz cycle, and then IRFFB must run its internal loop, and then it sends 6 USB calls, but USB calls have additional jitter and cannot be very accurate. The delay is around 29 milliseconds when IRFFB is used. So that's his explanation of it. And then he goes on further to clarify about telemetry-based force feedback. So he says, what our 360 Hertz mode is not is the telemetry-based force feedback. iRFFB has some telemetry-based additional effects, oversteer, understeer, and enhancements like the seat of the pants thing that we were just talking about. We can't do those with just the steering column torque data, which is what you get with direct input. We would need telemetry support that is coming up later to our wheelbase. So a little bit of a reveal there. Hopefully I'm allowed to share that. I don't know. Then he goes on to say, however, we can't copy what iRFFB is doing either, as the effects are in the iRFFB source code, which is public but licensed with the GNU General Public License, which means that if we were to copy them or make something even vaguely similar, we may have to release our firmware source code as well, which obviously they don't want to do. So there's a little bit of an explanation there as to what the differences are between iRFFB and what we have here. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Essentially what it's doing, as I said before, instead of the force feedback updating itself once per cycle at a sample rate or a cycle rate of 60 hertz or 60 times per second, we now have 6 packets of data, the current position and the 5 previous positions, and that is being sent once per cycle or 60 times per second. So you're getting 6 times the amount of data, but in doing so, because it's not actually sending through in real time, it's having to play that data back, which gives you a 16 millisecond delay, or somewhere there, about 16.7, I think it was. So there you have a quick rundown on what's actually going on behind the scenes. Let's just have a quick look now at how this is actually set up in iRacing, because there have been a few people, including myself, that had a few issues initially getting this running. So this is something that's included by default in the latest update or the latest build of iRacing. If you go into your app INI file, which is found under Documents and iRacing, and do a search for Simucube, you'll find line 166, at least at the time we're making this video. Load Simucube API equals 1. That should be the default setting. 1 equals on and 0 equals off. So if you want to do a bit of testing back to back to see what it feels like with this on and off, you can do that this way as well. And that's in fact exactly what I've been doing for a couple of hours now to sort of try to get my head around exactly what I'm feeling, make sure there's no placebo effect or anything like that. So that's what we're going to be getting into in just a moment. So that's how it's enabled by default. Now, if we go into the True Drive build, the latest build, which is 2024.3 or March 2024, and click on the Info tab here, you'll see some information listed here under firmware status bits. Now, once we open up iRacing, we should see in here a new high data rate listed there. We'll go back in a second and show you what that looks like. If that doesn't show up with iRacing open, then that means that this isn't working. What I would recommend you do in that case is make a backup of this app INI file, drag it out of that document/iRacing folder, make sure you keep that backup, and then allow iRacing to automatically rebuild that file, and then you should find that it starts working. That's what happened for me, and then I was actually able to drag my old app INI file back in, so I retained all those old settings, and it continued to work. So we're going to come back to this screen in just a minute, and I'll show you the new value that you see there. That will confirm that this is in fact working and that you're not imagining things. Okay, so if you've got a keen eye, you would have just seen high data rate pop up there under firmware status bits as iRacing was loading. That is confirming that we have that high data rate enabled. So what we're feeling is true to what they're expecting us to feel. Okay, so we're seated in the car now, ready to drive out on the track, but there is one more thing that I want you to do before you do that. So we're gonna go into profiles in this relatively new UI for Simucube 2 True Drive. And you can see under the paddock section, which is their online shareable profiles, there are already some profiles that have been created by some people of note. Samsonoid's got a 360 hertz profile. There's a 360 hertz best settings here as well, which I believe is an adaptation from one of Maradnus's profiles, and as you guys would know, he drives real life GT3 cars, so he should know what it should feel like in real life. I believe Dan Suzuki has got a profile here as well. You guys can scroll through, search, and find whatever you want here. I haven't actually created any of my own profiles here yet, but you may find that by the time that you're watching this, you may find something. But it's a very subjective thing. I would probably sooner go with somebody like Dan Murad's profile, who knows what the real life cars feel like, compared to somebody like me that can just subjectively create something that feels good to me. So that would be my recommendation there. If you have an existing profile that you like to drive with, what you can do is you can load that profile, go edit, and then what you want to do is just quickly make sure that your Simucube Force Reconstruction filter is set to either 1 or off. A lot of people were running around the sort of 3 to 5 mark. I was actually running 3 prior to this update. You'll find that it actually does dampen down some of these new details that you're going to be feeling in the force feedback. So they're recommending a setting of 1 or off. I found that off did feel a little bit grainy to me. Again, it's a subjective thing, so test it for yourselves. I wouldn't recommend just copying my settings and going. Definitely spend the time to familiarize yourself here. But 1 for me felt really good. That is literally all you need to do. All your other settings should be pretty well exactly the same here. So with that done, you are ready to jump out on track. Let's do exactly that now. Okay, so interestingly, even just sitting in the pits here, any of you guys that have watched my wheelbase reviews would know one of the things I like to do is sort of feel the sensation of the weight of the car as I rotate. You can see the car there kind of moving and lifting up as the wheels turn from side to side. Immediately I'm noticing there is a little bit more texture there than what we had before. But let's head out. Now I'm running around the Okayama circuit here, and there's a very good reason for that. This is one of the circuits that actually has properly mapped curbs and everything. As I actually learned today, I was talking to the guys over at Sigma Integrale. We're actually working on a review of their their DK2 Plus motion platform, and you can check that out soon. That'll be live very soon here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that one. But they were telling me that one of the things I questioned was there's quite a bit of variation in the texture feel between different circuits and even sometimes different curbs in iRacing. And I was asking what the reasons for that were, and they said some courses actually have the curbs and a lot more detail built into the track themselves, whereas other tracks are relying on canned effects for those ripple strip effects and whatnot. So this particular circuit has all of those textures and everything actually mapped into the circuit itself and transmitted through both the telemetry data and the force feedback data if you've got a wheelbase that's capable of actually reproducing those effects. So what that means is that we actually feel those sensations through the steering wheel, which is the reason why I've chosen this circuit. So I'm just going to drive around slowly to begin with here, and immediately I think the most important thing to understand here, and this is based off a number of hours of driving and observation now, this isn't something that's absolutely game-changing. And I know that's going to come as a disappointment to some people. And the reason I say that is because it is not something that's going to make you faster. Particularly with the Simucube 2 wheelbases, they already do an absolutely fantastic job of communicating the balance of the vehicle, what the car's doing underneath you, the weight transfer, the communication of grip front to rear. So if you're starting to get a little bit of push understeer or a little bit of oversteer, a little bit of step out, all those things were already communicated very well, both in iRacing and with the Simucube 2 bases. Now, look, every direct drive base these days does a pretty good job of those kinds of things, but in particular, at that top end of the market, Simucube 2, the Acertec wheelbases as well, and Fanatec with their new DD and DD Plus wheelbases, the Club Sport models, do a really good job of that as well. Everything is pretty darn close these days, and everything does, honestly, a good job of communicating those important details. And you can see there, as I got on the gas here, the rear end of the car started to step out. Everybody that's driven with a modern direct drive wheelbase would know that one of the big advantages of direct drive over belt driven or cog driven is the ability to catch those moments and really sort of feel what the car's doing communicated underneath you. And there's no improvement to that through what we've got here. What is improved, and I'm not going to spend ages harping on about this, but what we're feeling here is more detail in the ripple. You probably can see in the footage as I run up over, and I'm going to deliberately do it here, I'm going to slow down and drive up over a rumble strip here on the inside of the curve. And you can actually see how my hand was vibrating then. That was a detail that was always lacking, even on this circuit in iRacing previously. So little details like that, little subtle cues are a lot more defined and a lot more immersive and realistic now with this update than what they were previously. But the things that you need to feel that are conducive to driving quickly and consistently, I don't think have really changed. So I don't think there's anything in terms of detail here that's going to make you any faster, but definitely in terms of immersion, this steps things up. So I guess the big question is going to be, can you feel that 16 milliseconds of latency in those effects? And look, to me, I would say no. I'm an old man now. I'm turning 40 this year. So maybe if you're young and fresh, you might be able to sense that. For reference, I can't really tell the difference between a 100 hertz monitor and a 240 hertz monitor for sim racing. So that's kind of the limit of my perception, if that's any sort of point of reference for you. But with my old man senses, I'm not feeling anything that's conducive to driving more quickly or consistently, but just extra detail. And I'm not perceiving any lag whatsoever. Let's just quickly drive out on the grass as well. And I mean, the grass still doesn't have a lot of texture detail there. We'll go out on the gravel here as well, just for the sake of completeness. And again, there's not a lot of sensation there. I would say that's simply just because iRacing itself doesn't have the detail communicated in the force feedback signal to begin with. Remembering again that this isn't using telemetry-based data to generate these effects. This is purely a physics-based system. So you might find in areas like that, which arguably aren't necessarily important to driving, you're not really going to perceive anything more, or you might perceive a little bit less than what you do with FFB, for example. But let's pick up the pace a little bit now. I'm not super experienced driving around this circuit. It's been a while, so don't judge me. I've got no idea where the braking markers are in a GT3 anymore, so I'm probably going to be way off the pace here. But just sort of getting a feel for how the car moves underneath me, the balance of the car, touching those ripple strips. We'll run out wide here, and yeah, that you really get a nice clean sensation. Texture in the road is a little bit more detailed as well. But yeah, it's certainly nothing absolutely gobsmackingly game-changing, and I certainly don't want to oversell it, but it's certainly a good step in the right direction. And I would say that this probably does step things in terms of detail a touch higher than what we do have with the Acertec Invicta base at this point in time, at least. Now, they don't have a 360 hertz API at this point, so they are still relying on that 60 hertz signal. We don't have true force. Sorry, we don't have full force from Fanatec available yet in iRacing to test properly, although we did have that kind of early Python build that we tested in our first look video a while back. So you could certainly reference that for an idea, but that was more of a that was more communicating really high frequency textures, and like probably a little bit more aggressively than what this does. This is a little bit more subtle perhaps, and obviously there is a separate adjustment for the amplitude of those effects as well, but I don't want to talk about that too much until we actually have a proper full force integration. Likewise with True Force as well, with the Logitech G Pro base. True Force was never particularly good on the G923, but on the G Pro base it is actually very good. And I would say, again, it's probably a little bit more profound on the G Pro, but maybe not quite as realistic as this is. This does feel very authentic and very immersive for that reason. You just forget that it's there, which I think is one of the marks of something that is, when something is truly immersive, you kind of forget about it. You're pulled into the experience and not so much what you're actually feeling. So yeah, they've done a really good job of this. No complaints whatsoever, no sensation of lag. And I would say that there is that little bit more detail now, again, than what we have with that Acertec Invicta base. So in terms of responsiveness, I mean, we're running a Simucube 2 Ultimate here, and I can't really tell the difference with this now between this and the Acertec Invicta. I would say maybe, in terms of responsiveness, that is, like slew rate and whatnot. But I mean, look, all these differences are very subtle. There's really very little in it at this very top end. We've actually been testing the SimMagic bases, all three of them, over the last couple of days. So the Mini, the Alpha, and the Alpha U, the Ultimate. And none of those quite have the same level of granular detail that I'm getting here. This immediately feels smoother, more refined, and more detailed overall. But I mean, we are talking very fine margins here. For the premium that you're paying, whether or not it's worth it to you is going to be a very subjective thing. So what we're going to be doing over the next couple of months is going back through and reviewing a lot of other wheelbases that we've previously looked at. So we're going to be doing another comparison between the Simucube 2 Ultimate that you see on the rig here now. We've got a brand new Pro and Sport that we're going to be comparing. So we're going to be doing another comparison between the three because it's been a number of years now since we've done that. We're also going to be cross-comparing against the other offerings from the likes of Simucube, which we were just talking about. Got a review coming up of all three of their bases, which we're actually working on right now. So you can definitely get subscribed so you don't miss out on that one. And then, of course, comparing with the Mozza wheelbases, pretty much everything. We're going to be running through everything throughout the course of the next few months. So a good time to get subscribed if you're not already. I should also mention that we do have discount codes for most of these wheelbases that we've been talking about here down in the description box below as well. So if you are looking at picking up either a Simucube or anything else that we talked about, you can save yourself a little bit of money and help the channel out in the process as well. But look, as I was saying, everything these days is pretty darn good. You can't really go wrong with any choice, but this definitely is a big tick for Simucube. Definitely a good step forward. No meaningful lag or anything that I'm sensing at all, and definitely a noticeable and profound step up in detail, but not a game-changing step up in detail. Nothing that's going to make you faster or more consistent, purely just stuff that is going to have an influence on the level of immersion. A lot of us are racing for that immersion, so certainly not something to be dismissed, but certainly not something that is completely game-changing either. And I think that is probably the best way to summarize things. So I'm sure that most of you guys that already own a Simucube 2 base and are into your iRacing have probably already tested this out. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think, game-changing for you, or do you agree with my observations? Really what I'm hoping for out of this video is that those of you who may own a Simucube 2 base and maybe have moved away from iRacing, maybe this will give you a reason to check it out again. I don't know. Let us know in the comments down below if it compels you to jump back into iRacing. But mostly for those of you who might be weighing up the different options at the moment, I really hope that this has helped you understand better what this brings to the table in terms of the experience in iRacing. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. As I mentioned before, we've got a ton of reviews coming up with all the Simucube bases, the Simucube bases, basically just running through everything again and doing a whole bunch of cross comparisons. So if that's something that sounds awesome to you and you think might provide you some value, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Only about 30% of the people that watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel, and that is an awesome way of helping YouTube to understand that the content's valuable, so it shows it to other sim racers like you. So I really appreciate your support there, but above all, I appreciate you guys watching the video, so thanks very much for that, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.